Should I stay or should I go? Learn how to use should, ought to, and had better in English. Coming up. Hey friends, Teacher Prix here to help you talk to anyone, anywhere, anytime in English. First and foremost, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of my weekly videos. Now let's cut to the chase and start by talking about should and ought to. Yes, I'm gonna show you both of them. Now guys, should and ought to can be used interchangeably. Ooh, fancy word, interchangeably. That basically means there's no change in translation, in meaning. So you can use either one of them. They'll be fine, okay? There will be some moments when I will recommend using should, but in general, they're good, okay? They show the same idea. In questions, pay attention. In questions and negative sentences, should is gonna be your best friend, all right? So try to use should whenever you're making a negative phrase or a question. It is much more common, much more preferable than ought to. Should and ought to are used to express some kind of obligation or some kind of recommendation. You usually see should and ought to in situations when you're giving someone advice, when you're telling someone what to do, or because you're giving some kind of recommendation, or even some kind of obligation, okay? So children should always listen to their parents. So it is a recommendation or an obligation? What do you think? Depends on the point of view. So I could simply switch to ought to. Children ought to listen to their parents. And I think that in this case, I could even say the opposite. I think parents ought to listen to their kids too. Parents should listen to their kids too. That's how you establish a healthy relationship, don't you think? Anyway, guys, when I'm giving advice, when I'm giving recommendation, I'm usually gonna opt for should or ought to. If I'm asking a question, I don't know what to do, Teacher Prix. What should I do? What should I? What should I? Pay attention to the pronunciation. Should I? What should I do? Well, I think you ought to spend more time watching my videos. Guys, I think you ought to watch my videos more often. I think you should spend more time watching my videos. I think you should study more. I could use should or ought to when I'm answering the question. But if I'm asking the question, should is a much better option, okay? Now, pronunciation with ought to in affirmative sentences. You are not going to spell this way, okay? But if you are speaking, it is very common to listen to native speakers saying oughta, okay? Hey, you oughta listen to your parents, girl. You oughta listen to your parents. You ought to listen to your parents. So it is a common contraction. You can see the spelling here on the screen. This is an oral, a spoken spelling. You're not gonna write this way, okay? Got it? So hey, you oughta exercise more. Look at you. You can even walk for 5 minutes. That is awful. You oughta exercise. You ought to exercise. You should exercise. So I am contracting the sound of ought to and changing it to oughta. You oughta exercise more. You oughta study more. She ought to, she oughta, okay? But this is more common in conversations. I'm not gonna do this in questions. I'm not gonna do this in negative sentences. It is not common. That's why I'm not even showing it to you. If by any case you decide to use ought to in negative sentences, in American English, they tend to omit the to. You oughtn't eat so much, you know? That's not good for you. You oughtn't. Okay, you can see the spelling here on the screen. But if you're not contracting, you ought not to be. You ought not to be so mean to your sister. You should not be so mean to your sister. You ought not to be. You oughtn't be, okay? As I said, this is what you would do in a negative sentence. But should you? No, you shouldn't, okay? In spoken language, opt for should. It's much better. In the situation, when I'm giving recommendation, when I'm giving advice, when I'm telling someone what I believe, what I think that person needs to do, should do, has to do, and I'm going to express the idea of recommendation or a light sense of obligation, I can. Because when we're talking about obligation, and I have other videos here on my channel, that are better ways to express obligation, okay? Something that you really have to do. Have is a good one, but there are other ways. But should can express that idea depending on the context, okay? But it's not in order. No, not in order, all right? And hey, if you're enjoying this lesson, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. And now, let's talk about had better. I love had better. When I use had better in a conversation, I'm usually expressing a sense of urgency, okay? I am giving some kind of advice and I am expressing some kind of urgency. I will often use had better to express something I believe is a good idea or not, okay? I think it's not a good idea for you to do this, or I think it's a good idea to do this. But there is that sense of urgency, okay? Hey, you'd better call mom. She's been looking for you all day. You should call mom. She has been looking for you all day. So I'm giving a piece of advice and I express that sense of urgency. Hey, you'd better call mom. She's been trying to find you. She's been looking for you all day. I'm expressing some kind of urgency. Mom had been looking for me all day, so I'd better call her. And you will often contract the had to apostrophe letter D. So I'd better. Hey, I'd better go. I have a lot of stuff to do at home, so I'd better get going. I'd better get going. I should go home. I'd better get going. I'd better go. So I'm expressing a sense of urgency. It's better that I go. It's a good idea that I go now, okay? Oh, and an example of had better in the negative. You just included the word not. I'd better not tell them the truth. Otherwise, they're never going to forgive me. So I'd better not tell them the truth, which is a terrible example, by the way. If you lie to someone, you should just tell them the truth. First of all, don't lie, okay? Because then you will not get yourself into a situation like this when you're thinking, oh my God, should I say the truth or should I run away? You know? So don't lie. Simple, okay? So I'd better not. He'd better not. Peter had better not show up here without any answers. Had better not. So I will include the word not after had better. You'd better not lie to me, young man. I know what you did. Now explain to me why. Why the hell did you do it? Why did you break my heart? Yo. So I can use had better in negative sentences. It is common, there's not a problem with it, but in questions it is strange, and depending on the context, it can be a little formal, okay? So at the end of the day, guys, should is your best pal, all right? Use should in questions, in affirmative sentences, in negative sentences. And if you have a sense of urgency, you're gonna use had better. But if it's urgent, you're not really asking a question, you're telling someone something. So it is a much more common situation, okay? If you're gonna ask a question, what had I better do? It is so weird. Can I do it? Yes, but honestly, I've never seen anyone saying that. And I lived abroad. I watch movies every week. I watch podcasts, lectures, formal and informal lectures. So I am in contact with a lot of audio materials. And I can honestly tell you that I've never seen such kind of question. What had I better do? You know, it's possible. In terms of grammar, it's correct. But at the end of the day, English has to be simple. English has to be efficient. And should is your best friend, okay? If you enjoyed this lesson, share, like, and subscribe. Other than that, I'll see you next time. Bye!